All right, we're going to go ahead and get started today. Thank you all for coming. My name is Cornell, and I'm currently the president of the Graduate and Professional Women's Network. Before we begin, we have a few announcements. First and foremost, I'd like to thank all of you for coming out today. We really appreciate your attendance at this series. And I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors. This is a collaboration between the Graduate and Professional Women's Network, the Graduate School, and the President's Council of Cornell Women. For those of you who are not familiar, the President's Council of Cornell Women is a group of highly accomplished Cornell alumni who seek to champion women students, faculty, staff, and alumni as they lead within their fields at Cornell and across the world. This series is supported through their Leadership Grant Program, and we actually have 4 members of PCCW here today, aside from our speaker. And we were wondering if they would be willing to sort of stand, wave, and possibly introduce themselves to the crowd, or not, depending on how comfortable you feel.
I'm Deborah Ward. I'm a filmmaker based here in Ithaca, and I'm happy to talk afterwards if anybody has any questions. I'm Nancy Law. I work in higher education from admissions to alumni relations to career services, and on the side work with PCCW and athletics and the LGBT community and other areas.
Mary Granger, I'm a full-time volunteer in the Ithaca community, specializing in communications and fundraising, but I've also raised 3 daughters. Maybe a step beyond where you are, so I'm happy to.
I'm Beth Prudence, and I work at Morgan Stanley, and I'm going to be your next presenter.
Thank you all very much for coming to support this today. And in general, PCCW is so supportive of this series and also of Cornell students, especially women. So I encourage you all to look out for their microgrant program, which is due October 1st, and to look at this leadership grant program later on in the year. Second, I would like to let you know about our next events. We have our Mix and Mingle coming up in October, which is an informal setting for networking or just relaxing. Please come out and join us for dinner at the Big Red Barn. And then we also have our next speaker series. As Beth Prudence mentioned, she'll be talking about personal finance in early November. All right, regarding today's events, we will be recording this for a video library. So if you have any questions, please be sure to project so that we can actually hear you on the recording. And today, we would like to welcome Dr. Susan Anderer to the stand. She's a clinical psychologist and certified school psychologist in private practice from the suburbs of Philadelphia. Through her 26-year career, Dr. Anderer's work has centered on psychological assessment and psychotherapy. Her areas of expertise include therapeutic assessment, parenting, adolescent development, and adult psychotherapy. Currently, her work focuses on older adolescents with failure to launch, and hopefully she's here today to help us avoid that. We're talking about struggling to transition from either high school to college or from college into the adult working world, which is something that some of us might be dealing with. She's been published in the Huffington Post, and it's often quoted on the Road to College blog. She's also an adjunct clinical professor in the doctoral program at Widener University, and she speaks nationally about parenting and adulting. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Anderer to the stand with a round of applause. I even had it written.
There we go.
All right.
We're just doing a little technological. There we go.
And
Present.
perfect.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I come here to talk to you this morning as an alumna of Cornell, a member of the mentoring committee of PCCW, and a licensed clinical psychologist. So in preparing for this, I noticed in looking at past symposiums that a lot of them focus on networking, negotiation, career development, all of which are very important in being an adult, none of which I'm talking about today. So the purpose of this symposium is really about feeling independent and happy as an adult. So there was some back and forth with marketing about whether to call this successful launching your career. This is really not about career launching, but really more about taking care of yourself, becoming confident, which will eventually help you to successfully launch your career. I think the two are interchanged. So people do talk a lot about adulting, whether it's paying bills or doing laundry, all the things that your parents used to do for you. But how do you make the transition from being an adolescent who is dependent on your parents to being a college student who may have been a little less dependent on your parents, to being a graduate student who is theoretically less dependent on your parents, to being a working professional who, again, in theory, is less dependent on your parents? So we're going to take a little bit of a look at that. So how to be an adult. So the best thing that we need, and this is how you know I'm not just a stupid old person, is I actually know what this is, right? If you don't know what this is, then you are just a stupid old person. But I have teenagers, so I am not. And I know exactly what fruit I am, what state I am, what Gilmore Girl character I am. I'm Lorelai, by the way. So this is a BuzzFeed quiz on how you know whether or not you're an adult. So we're going to just go through some of them. When something breaks in your apartment, who fixes it, right? So that's the question. What do? Do you fix it yourself, your landlord or a professional fixes it, or your parents? How many dishes do you know how to cook? And more than 5, somewhere between 1 and 5, or 0. When someone your age gets engaged, what's your reaction? Nothing new. I get really excited and then really envious. What is wrong with these people? Do you own a suit? More than one, actually. Yes, just one. Or lol, LOL, no. That actually may be me. How long can you keep a plant alive? My answer is actually 0. For years, usually no longer than a year, and maybe 2 weeks tops. This is a perfect one. What time do you get up on the weekend? Or I was just talking to Marika about the challenges of being a graduate student and managing unending time on your own. So this may be actually what time do you get up during the week. Before 9, sometime between 9 and 11, or afternoon. And you can guess which one is more the adult version. Do you iron your clothes? Yes, all the time. Occasionally, or I'll drop it off at a dry cleaner. And I do have 2 daughters who go to Cornell, and I happen to know there are absolutely no dry cleaners in Ithaca, or never. Have you started saving for retirement? And this is going to be Beth's talk, I'm sure, to some extent. But absolutely, I have a 401k and an IRA. Sort of. I have a 401k, I think. And does my piggy bank stash count? When you're at a restaurant with your parents, who picks up the check? I do. It depends on the occasion, or oh, they definitely do. Who pays the utilities for your home? I do. My roommates and I split them, or my parents. This is also a classic. When you get sick, what do? I make an appointment with my doctor, pop some NyQuil, hope for the best. My parents make an appointment for me. You get the theme, right? Do you have a personal budget? And this is something we're going to touch on and Beth's going to expand on. Yes, I mostly stick to it. Whoops, sorry about that. Yes, I mostly stick to it. Nope. And yes, it's pretty aspirational. And this is also another one that, when you become an adult probably is relevant. How many drinks do you usually have on a typical night out? Any more than 2, I'm toast. Between 3 and 5, depending on the night. Katie here on boy, which I can't do. The limit does not exist. Also a relevant one for Beth. Who does your taxes? I do, or my accountant does, my parents, or my family members, and what are those? So those are some of the things, I don't know how you did in taking that quiz, but those are some of the things that we think about when we think about what it means to be an adult. So what does it mean to be an adult? And really, the big question is, why in the world would you want to be one? Because there's something very attractive about being an adolescent and having people take care of you and pick up the pieces around you. In the past, if you've taken any psychology undergrad, or perhaps you're a graduate student here, we thought that adulthood really began at 21. So your adolescence was 13 to 21 was adolescence. Now, for lots of reasons that I won't get into, we have this idea of emerging adulthood, and adolescence really now extends to 27. So this is a period that's most important in shaping a person's future, as it brings a lot of changes in your love, your work, your worldview, and your identity. So why would you want to be an adult? Any thoughts about what some of the benefits are in being a grown-up? Anyone? What's that?
No.
No, okay. So when you are 13, 14, 15, and you have your parents who are doing your laundry and paying the bills and doing all of those kinds of things, it is great. But sometimes people feel constrained by their inability to make their own decisions, right? So the classic thing that you sometimes will see on a TV show is a fight between a parent and their adolescent, and the father typically will say, you have to, and as long as you're living under my roof, you'll follow my rules. So one of the benefits of being a grown-up is that you get to make decisions on your own. That's a good thing, and that is a challenging thing at the same time. So one of the other reasons that it's important to become an adult is that as you become independent and you make your own decisions and you're charting your own course, the support from your parents initially does feel good, and it can be helpful in solving the immediate crisis, but it actually undermines your sense of independence and confidence. So what a lot of the work that I do is actually working with parents on helping their children launch. And what we talk with parents about is this idea of optimal responsiveness. So it's not that we're going to throw you all into the deep end and say, it was really nice to know you, call me in 5 years when you have grandchildren and I'll play with them then. So it's not a sink or swim, but it's how do we as parents really help in stages to give more independence to our kids so that they can really feel good about their ability to make decisions, to provide for themselves, and to solve problems by themselves. So how do you know when you're an adult? Like, what's the sign? I have a nephew actually who's a graduate student here, and he likes to say to me all the time, I'm an adult, I'm a grown-up. And I'm like, why? Like, how do you know when you're grown up? Any thoughts about how you'll know when that happens? Yeah?
Pay your own phone bill.
You pay your own phone bill. Yes, absolutely. Good sign. What's that?
You own a couch.
You own a couch. Wow, that's a new one. Okay, yes, that's a good thing. Absolutely. Yeah. Get off of your parents' insurance plan. That's also a good sign. Anyone else?
You have kids.
You have kids. Kids can be yes, or
Or a pet.
a pet. Another good one. Yeah, in the back.
You make your own decision when you're accountable for yourself.
Yeah, and making your own decisions is a big one. So all of these are signs that you're an adult. And most of them don't come all at the same time. Most of them do tend to come in stages. So I've sort of been preempted a little bit, but I'm going to bring this up. Does anyone know what this is? Anyone seen one of these? Right? I actually have a $10 bill here for anyone. This is like the Price is Right, or the Let's Make a Deal. $10 bill for anyone who can produce one of these with their name on it. All right, I got a winner. All right. Okay, so see me afterwards. This is yours. That is, I'm telling you, that is rare. So usually parents do pay cell phone bills. This is my cell phone bill, and my kids are all still on it. Most parents are paying their kids' cell phone bills for like a ridiculous amount of time. So congratulations to you. That is one of the signs, and someone touched on that. That's one of the signs that you are actually a grown-up. The other piece in the cell phone bill is tied to this that defines being an adult is that financial responsibility, is taking financial responsibility for yourself. So when we ask lots of 20-somethings about what it means to be an adult, sort of the most common thing that we tend to hear is that you're accepting responsibility for yourself and you're making independent decisions. But there is also an economic component. So one of the things that has pushed adulthood to 27 is that the age now, the median age in the United States of when people become financially independent is now 27, right? So it used to be you graduated from college and you got a job and you were financially independent. That tends not to happen so much anymore, which is why we do have, and we were talking about this, my daughter and a group of friends last night, about the bounce back, the kids that are back at home, living back at home after college. And some of that is life is expensive. And it financially, for all kinds of economic reasons that I'm not going to go into, it is harder now to be a young adult in your 20s and be successful financially, to be financially independent, to afford that cell phone bill, to afford health insurance and all kinds of things. Yours is the first generation that is anticipated not to make more money than your parents. So there are real economic factors at work that have really worked to prolong adolescence. The other piece of it is that the way our culture has shifted, and this is if you were raised in the United States, in sort of the typical United States household, is that we have a wave, and I'm sure you've heard about helicopter parenting, right? Parents tend to be more involved in their kids' lives and to be helping them along the way in terms of making decisions, which again feels great in the moment. You have a problem, you call your parents help, or you're at home, you're struggling with your homework, your parents help you write the paper that's due tomorrow as you're crying hysterically at 11 o'clock at night. It feels really good in the moment to have that support. What happens in the long run is we're inadvertently giving our kids a message that they need us more than they actually do. And so when it's time to really stand on your own 2 feet, it's much harder to do that. I want to talk a little bit about, for you, what it means to your parents as you become more independent. So if, again, sort of along that lines of sort of the helicopter parenting, or even helicopter parenting has a negative connotation to it. So we like to refer to it in my field a little bit as over-parenting. So it's trying to, we don't want to see our kids suffer. We want to be as helpful as we can. And so sometimes we provide too much help, particularly if you come from a family where you had a parent who stayed at home with you, and their job, and it's a very important job, their job was to take care of you, right? So you go off to college or you go off to graduate school, and that parent is now unemployed. So what happens to that person when you are successfully launching and they now have no job? So sometimes what happens is inadvertently they thwart some of those attempts at being a grown-up or to be separate so they can get reemployed. So the other piece of what's hard for your parents can be they worry a little bit if you are financially independent, if you are on your own, if you have your own kids, that their voice and their values, their choices are not going to have an impact on you. Again, sort of hearkening back to that idea of the TV dad who says, as long as you live under my roof, young lady, you're going to follow my rules. Which, if you're not living under their roof and you're not taking their money, sort of how do they have an impact on who you are and how your life goes? The way people tend to separate and the ideas that come with it tend to be a little bit reflected in how your own parents navigated this developmental stage. So how did they become independent? What was their road? How did their parents manage finances and all kinds of other things? That tends to set some sort of a course in terms of what's going to happen for you. How old were they when they became independent? How old were they when they got married? Nobody said married. That was like the first time I haven't heard that one. If you get married, some people see that as a sign of being an adult. So how old were they when that happened? How old were they when they had their kids? How old were they when they bought their first house? And it doesn't have to be your path, but it can really impact how they see your successful branching out and launching, and also your own expectations for yourself. And that's another piece, and one of the things that doesn't always happen within families is what are their expectations? Sometimes we make expectations or assumptions about what our parents' expectations are, and they're not actually true. So we have an internalized idea about what we think our parents want, and it's not actually what they're expecting. So what I do really encourage parents and families to do in my practice is to actually have conversation. How old will I be when I need to pay my own cell phone bill? When I graduate from college, what financial responsibilities will I have? How will you support me? Even down to what's the expectation and how often we have contact. Do I need to call you every day? Are you going to follow me on Find My Friends? Like what are the boundaries in terms of what the expectations are as you as an independent adult? And it's important to have those conversations. We've been sort of joking this afternoon a little bit about the fears and not wanting to be an adult, but really what's the worry? What's the fear about being an adult? Anyone?
Pay the government a lot of taxes.
Taxes are a big fear, yeah, sort of paying the government, yeah.
Failure in career.
I'm sorry?
Failure in career.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that you might not make it. That can be sort of a scary thing. Like, what if I can't do this? Other worries about being an adult? not having something to fall back on, right? And so that sort of goes back to that idea of optimal responsiveness. So hopefully you have a family or a community that if you tried some things, and we're going to talk a lot about failure in a minute, that if you were to try some things and they didn't work out, that there would be someone there to pick up the pieces a little bit. The reason that it's important to look at fear is that a lot of the young adults that I work with in my clinical practice are not here. They are living at home. They haven't found employment. They're not launching. We call it failure to launch. And I do like sort of the more positive psychology, successful launching versus the failure to launch. But a lot of what brings them into my office is their parents will say, he won't get off the couch. He doesn't do anything but play video games all day. He won't make a plan. I don't know what to do. And what we know as psychologists is that underlying sort of that apathy, and the young person will come into my office and say, I don't really care. Nothing really sounds attractive. I don't really know what I want to do. A lot of that is fear, and a lot of it based in that fear of failure. Because the path to that point, the path to your early 20s, is pretty clear and pretty set, particularly for this audience, right? You do well in high school, so you can go to a quote, quote, good college. That's a different lecture. So you do that. You do well in college, so you can either go to a good graduate school or get a good job. And so that's pretty set for you. What happens and what's scary is you get here, and then what? So the possibilities are endless. There's something that's really exciting about that, and there's something that's really scary about that. Because again, what we know from some social psych research is that if you don't have any choices, you feel anxious, and if you have too many choices, you feel anxious. So there is an optimal range in terms of choice in order to really mitigate that anxiety. So being an adult is scary because you have a lot of choices. It's also exciting because you have a lot of choices. So let's talk a little bit about skills that you need to be an independent adult. What does it take to be an independent adult? And one of the most important is affect regulation. So it's that ability to calm yourself down, right? You are in a new experience, you're here at Cornell, you have a new job. It's anxiety provoking. You've never done it before. You don't know what it looks like. What are you going to do, and how are you going to manage that? So again, sort of going back to my Psych 101, which I took here, with Dr. Moss, who was amazing. According to Lawrence Sternberg, he did a research study, which maybe some of you know about, and what he found was the best predictor of how people transition into adulthood, or from one stage of life into another, is their ability for self-regulation. So that is the major task of adolescence, which we've now agreed goes to 27. So he did something called the marshmallow test, right? You've heard of the marshmallow test? You take little kids, toddlers, you put them in a room, and you tell them, you put them at a table, there are all kinds of marshmallows on the table, and you tell them that if they don't eat them, then they'll get to eat a lot of marshmallows. But if they eat it, that's sort of the one they get, and then you leave the room and you video them and you see what they do. So it's the marshmallow test. What the research finds is that, and the task is really, can the toddler, can the preschooler resist? How long can they resist eating the marshmallow? Some eat them right away, some can wait for a really long time. If you watch the video, it's on YouTube. There's a really cute little boy who licks the marshmallow. Like, does that count? What we find is that the people who can wait longer, the preschoolers who wait longer and had better self-control, actually do better in adolescence. They have higher SAT scores, and they have better coping skills. So what this tells us is these are people who can tolerate frustration better, and they are better able to control their impulses. So one of the things that's really important, and we're going to talk some more about later this afternoon, is this tolerance for failure. So you guys are all sitting here. My guess is that there's not a lot of this F word in your life, which is failure, right? So you need to be able to take some risk and risk falling on your face if you're going to move forward and launch. And it's a really scary thing to think about, and not something that a lot of people talk about. Because what you see is you see your professors or you see other people sitting next to you, other graduate students, and you hear about their successes, what you don't hear about are their failures, and those are really important. We're going to talk more about that. You need to be able to establish some sort of short-term goal in order to not get overwhelmed by the long-term goal, right? So my graduate program, my doctorate's in clinical psychology, was 5 years. So I went right from Cornell to graduate school, which had its pluses and minuses, mostly pluses. If that was the ultimate goal and I had no goals in between, then it would have been hard for me to stay motivated. All of us need some sort of reward along the way or to feel like we're making progress. If we don't set short-term goals, then we deprive ourselves of that ability. The other piece in terms of things that you need, and Beth is really going to talk more about this, is how much money do you need and how do you manage the money? And the money becomes a really important piece of it. In terms of your happiness, right? We all need some money in order to feel happy. So there are handouts somewhere. It has a basic worksheet for you in terms of how to establish a budget. How do you decide how much you can afford for housing? How many times can you go to the Nines for pizza? Can you afford, to go to Taste of Thai X many times, a month? Those are important things to think about, because if you feel like you have a good financial plan, it does increase your sense of confidence in terms of taking care and checking some of those adult boxes. And it also helps, to make sure that you're not getting into adult-like trouble. So the other thing, and maybe Beth will talk about this too, are all of those credit card ads that you're getting. You can, my oldest just graduated, but her mailing address is still our house. Every day there are piles and piles and piles of envelopes she gets from credit card companies. And my guess is she could have 5 credit cards if she wanted to. She cannot, she's a graduate student, she cannot afford 5 credit cards. So, sort of knowing that and having that financial savvy is really important. That's the worksheet that is circulating somewhere. So establishing your monthly budget, I'm not going to go through it. Beth's probably going to do some of that. What are some of your fixed expenses? What are variable expenses? And how do you pay those taxes? We got to remember that you pay the taxes. I don't know that it works this way at Cornell, but I'll just mention this. My oldest is a graduate student at Penn. She gets a stipend. They do not withhold for taxes. So she needed to know that was good information for her, because when she gets a paycheck, she needs to be saving, because in April she will get a tax bill, right? So you want to make sure, I don't know how it works here at Cornell, you want to make sure you've investigated that. So what are the roadblocks to launching? What are the things that get in the way of people being happy, or of, as we like to say, ending up on their parents' couch in the end? And one of the big ones is job dissatisfaction. So a lot of the 20-somethings that I work with will say, well, I had a job, it was really boring, I hated it, I had to start at the bottom, I really want an office, I'm in a cubicle, sort of all of those things that could make you unhappy with a job. So Amy Wisnowski is a professor at Yale, sorry about the reference, and what she found in her research is that how you think about your job is more important than the actual job that you do. So it is a frame of mind. Your happiness, and I'm going to kind of come back to this, is actually to some extent a frame of mind. So her research, she looked at employees in hospitals, maintenance workers, people whose job it was to mop the floors and wipe down the surfaces, and they fell into 2 categories: people who were really happy with their jobs and people who weren't, and they were all doing the same job. And what she found is that the people who saw themselves, the maintenance workers who saw themselves as part of the health care team, so part of their job was to make sure that the patient's experience in the hospital was helpful, helpful and positive for them. They were more satisfied with their jobs than the people who were just like, I just empty the trash cans. So part of your job then is looking for what is it that you find meaningful in your job. In your job right now is to be a graduate student. So what parts of that, of what you do every day, are meaningful? Is your job a calling, right? So is it something that you feel like this is something you were destined to do? Most people don't have that. So there's a fantasy out there that you're going to find this perfect job and it's just going to be the thing that you've always dreamed about. So I will tell you, when I came to Cornell as an undergrad, I came here because I wanted to be a vet. So we see how that worked out, right? So that was my thing. I was going to be a vet. They took bio the first year. It was horrible. I hated it. It's a long story you don't want to know. I took Psych 101. I loved it. Here I am. So very few people actually do have a calling. But that idea that there is that perfect job there for you creates a lot of anxiety. So the trick is really finding pleasure in what you're doing now. So what kinds of things do you enjoy? And how can they help you bring meaning to your job and to the world? So again, sort of from personal experience, my doctorate is actually in clinical psychology. So I have something that's called a PsyD. It's PSY.D. I do not have a doctor of philosophy in psychology. That's a different degree. The reason that I chose a PsyD over a PhD is that I hate research. I don't like it. I don't like statistics. You can ask Professor Gilovich. He used to teach statistics. I was his student. I hated it. I didn't want to be a researcher. That's not what I like. That's not what I'm good at. And I like to work with people. I like to do this. I like to help people in my office. And PsyDs, the emphasis, we do some research. I do have a doctoral dissertation, but most of the emphasis is on clinical practice. So knowing that for myself saved me a lot of time and heartache. If I had suffered and struggled through 5 or 6 years of a PhD program, I think I would have become disenchanted. Being able to identify what it is that you enjoy and doing more of it is something that she calls job crafting. So how can you do more of what you like? How can you make sure that the tasks that you're assigned, you can beef up as much as possible? So obviously there are the givens, right? You may have responsibilities as a TA. Maybe you love teaching, maybe you hate teaching. And that's going to be a piece of what you do. But if there are other things that you like to do better, how do you feed that into your list of responsibilities? And how do you do that? So how can you change your job and craft your job so that you can find ways to be happy in the here and now? Because that's the piece that is important. In terms of the failure piece, viewing life as an experiment is really an important frame to move forward. So a lot of us tend to, as we go back to that idea of being worried about failure, rather than setting each task up as either I'm going to succeed at this or I'm going to fail at this, it's more I'm going to try this and see what happens. If I like it, I'm going to do more of it. If I don't like it, I'm probably not going to do that again. If you can come at it from that frame rather than judging each step at each phase, then you're going to be more happy in the here and now. And that importance of failure is really important. Taking chances, trying things out. So I have a student that I work with who went to a prestigious undergraduate program. She's in a prestigious graduate program. She's very worried about her next step. Part of her wants to make money, and part of her wants to really do something that she finds meaningful. And the worry is, I'm going to make the wrong career move. I'm going to make a wrong choice. And it's really not about making the right choice. There's no perfect choice. It's really about trying one and seeing what happens and then doing something different. So we're talking about failure and the importance of failure. I just wanted to give you a list of some of the people that you may know and try to take some of the pressure off of, I need to publish today, I need to be tenure track today. These are just some people and where they were and what they were doing. So at age 23, Tina Fey was working at a YMCA. At 23, Oprah was fired from her first reporting job. 24, Stephen King was working as a janitor and living in a trailer. 27, Vincent van Gogh failed as a missionary and decided to go to art school. 28, everyone knows this story. J.K. Rowling was a suicidal single parent living on welfare. 28, Wayne Coyne from the Flaming Lips was a fry cook. Age 30, Harrison Ford was a carpenter. Martha Stewart at 30 was a stockbroker. 37, Ang Lee was a stay-at-home dad working odd jobs. Julia Child released her first cookbook at 39, got her own cooking show at 51. Vera Wang failed to make the Olympic figure skating team, didn't get the editor-in-chief position at Vogue, and designed her first dress at age 40. Stan Lee didn't release his first big comic book until he was 40. Alan Rickman gave up his graphic design career. The list kind of goes on and on and on and on. The message being that you don't have to sort of be a major success at the moment. You don't need to have published. And one of the things that I also know is that people really pretty quickly get caught up in what the person next to you is doing. As much as you can avoid that, sort of the happier we'll be, which brings me to this idea of perfectionism, right? So what is perfectionism? Where does it come from? A lot of it, for most of us, comes from putting all of our eggs in one basket. So for you guys, you are all academically successful. You wouldn't be here at Cornell if you hadn't have been. But what else are you? So you're smart, I get that, that's good to be smart. But what else are you? Because if that's all of who you are, then each time you fail, each time you hit a bump in the road, it is going to hit you harder than if you had other things sort of to fall back on. I'm smart and, right? I'm smart and I like to whatever. So the social media piece I kind of have to touch on. It doesn't help. I always say to my patients, everyone is having a better time than you are on Instagram. They just are. Nobody posts like, here's the D I got on my test. Here's me sitting alone in my room on Friday night. It doesn't happen that way. And then there's this whole idea of the imposter syndrome, right? So all of us do this a little bit. I'm doing it a little bit now, right? I kind of know what I'm talking about. No, I'm just kidding. I really do know what I'm talking about. But the idea in the therapeutic perspective that I come from is in interpersonal psychology, specifically self-psychology, which is what we do if there are pieces of ourselves that we don't like about ourselves is we pack them up and we put them away in a box and we splinter it off, and it's called the false self. Those pieces are still in the box, but they become scarier because they're in the box, and over time we sort of forget what's in the box. So every time we fail or there's like a little pressure from the box, it gets scarier and scarier. We're worried that whatever's in the box is so awful and terrible that it's going to spill out everywhere and eclipse all of the good stuff that we've done. And a lot of people, a lot of us spend a lot of time running away from what's in the box. The idea is to open the box and look inside, and you will probably find that it's actually not that scary. Women tend to suffer from this more than men do. They tend to internalize all of the negative feedback they've ever received, and they own it. So you may have that negative tape running in your head of all the negative feedback that you've gotten. Again, and I really do appreciate there's some men in the audience too, but just in terms of looking at the female piece, when people look at a job description and decide whether or not they're going to apply for that job and whether that job is a good fit for them. When men look at that job description, if they fit 60% of the characteristics on that job description, they're like, yep, going for it. Women, unless it's 100%, they're like, yeah, I'm not really qualified for that. So think about that, right? You don't need to be 100% qualified for a job. Men don't do it. Women shouldn't do it too. One of the things that came up as I was talking to Marika about this is why do people feel sort of more pressure as grad students to perform maybe than you did as an undergrad? And in looking at some of the research on this, I think some of it is you're being paid now. So there's something about sort of being paid for your work. Or when I was in graduate school, and particularly when I was doing my doctoral dissertation, there was a lot of emphasis on saying something new. You have to say something new. You have to say something new. And I'm like, I don't have anything new to say. And that felt really hard. And then there's the time piece, right? How do you manage your time? You have all of these things. How do you manage your time? The work-life balance. Lots of people talk about this, and you can see it's everywhere in the literature. There's so many books about this. This also, I have to say, I think is a little bit of a myth. I've always been a working mom. I have 3 beautiful children, and I balanced my life as best I could, but it is hard to be in 2 places at one time. So there's a woman also at Yale, her name is Lori Santos. She taught a course last year at Yale called The Course of the Good Life. You may have heard of this. It got a lot of press, and it was in the New York Times. It's the most popular course ever taught at Yale. And basically the idea was how to be happy. So you can actually take her course If you want to, there's a link, and I'll bring it up through Coursera if you want to, but I'm going to give you the summary. So if we look at the survey of American College of Health Associations, 52% of students report feeling hopeless. So that's half of the people in this room have some sense of feeling hopeless. You can take her course if you want. She'll tell you how to be happy. I will give you the summary so you don't, if you don't have, as a graduate student, have the time. What she really talks about is that happiness is a mindset to be cultivated, not a condition to be imposed. And you've heard that before, right? Life is a journey and not a destination. So what makes people happy? Time is the thing that we find that makes people happy. We live in a culture now where when someone says, hi, how are you? What's the response, right? What do people usually say? Busy is what people say. And we value that busyness. We place value on being busy. And there's a negative connotation to people being lazy, to not having enough to do. There's also a piece, economists who study happiness have decided that there is a minimum amount of money that you need to be happy. So money doesn't buy happiness, but there is a minimal level of money that you need. The target is $74,000. If you can hit that $74,000 mark, it evidently does make you feel happy, but there's no increase above that. So if you make $250,000, you're not that percentage happier than the person who makes 74. But time is something that makes people happy. So what Professor Santos's research has found is that hiring someone to do jobs that free up your time actually does make you feel happier. And the way she replicated this at Yale is people came to class one day and she had a note on the door and said, class is canceled. You now have 50 minutes to do whatever you want. The one caveat is you cannot study. So the interesting piece of that is she got all kinds of panicked phone calls and you got a grade for you had to write a report about what you did, not like a 2-sentence thing about what you did with your time. And she got a panicked thing from parents like, well, what if this and what if that? Parents were like, could not believe that sort of this was a real thing and were worried about their child's grade. She talks a lot about finding happiness in the small things. And you're at Cornell. Just walking here, I stayed at the Statler last night. There's a waterfall that's sort of right outside of the Big Red Barn that I've always loved. That made me happy today. So finding really small things to bring you some happiness, that helps. Professor Santos talks a lot about things that you've heard, gratitude journals, walks in nature, time with friends. All of those things are really important. But I think not the whole deal. This goal setting thing is really important. Setting short-term goals. If you are waiting to be happy until you graduate and get a position somewhere, it's going to be an awful long 5 years. You're going to be miserable for 5 years. Don't do that. Find something now that you get, some sort of short-term goal that you can work towards now. This is one as women that we're not great at, asking for help. But something that we need to do if we're going to be happy. So it's good to be independent. It's not great to be a martyr. So they did a research with the Working Mothers Institute, did a research. I don't know if people in here have kids. Are there working moms in here? Working moms? One working mom, a couple working moms. Okay, so when working mothers tend to report that they have more responsibility for home care than their spouses do. And in general, they tend to spend some more time. How do you redistribute that, or again, hire somebody to help you with that? How do you know when you need professional help? I'm just gonna really quickly go through these, the signs of depression, changes in sleep pattern, loss of pleasure in the things that you used to find pleasure in, feeling helpless or hopeless, a sense of impending doom, lethargy, weight gain or loss, thoughts of harming yourself, certainly. These are things that would be signs that you need immediate help. Signs of anxiety, which a lot of us have. Pervasive and persistent worry, thoughts racing pulse or heartbeat, feelings of panic. Again, signs that you want to seek immediate help. I was talking actually with someone before we started the lecture. My preference would be for you to get support way before we got to these, right? So they're working here at Cornell, and I would love to see them work intensely in this area. How do you find help How do you find the ability to talk to someone about how you're thinking and feeling well before you get to this stage? And knowing when to seek help is really important. It's probably the most important piece of anything that will happen here at Cornell in your 20s is how do you learn how to take care of yourself? How do you learn to tune in? Because I promise you, whatever fancy lab equipment you're working on, whatever opportunities are out there, you will not be able to make use of them if you're not feeling good. So that's my pitch for mental health at Cornell. So what can you do in the here and now? Let's talk about that. The first is to acknowledge the real problem. So if you're not feeling happy now, why? Really thinking about why and spending time. And again, as I had said before, sometimes too many choices are overwhelming. If you have lots and lots of opportunities, it can be hard to and create anxiety when you feel like you need to pick one, because people do worry about making the wrong choice and making the wrong decision. Sometimes people feel like they have no real skills, and that fear of failure is really out there. One of the things that we know in psychology that is really important to your self-esteem and in feeling happy is assess what's in your control. What can you control and what can't you, right? So there are pieces of it. You're here. You've signed up for however many years of your graduate degree. That part is not changing. If there are pieces of what you're doing here that are making you unhappy, what about that can you change? How can you make that different? Is there a different professor you can work under? Can you shift the kind of research that you're doing? Can you shift things in terms of, at home or your relationships? What is in your control to change in order to help yourself to feel better? Formulate strategies. How are you going to sort of tick through and accomplish what it is that you need to do? And that's essential. It's really essential to break things down and look at what you can accomplish immediately. So one of the pieces of advice that comes out of the military is, it sounds sort of silly, but when you watch anything in the military, whether it's on TV or in the news, you know that the first thing that they do in the military when they get up in the morning is they make their bed. Right? So why is that they do that in the military, right? Because is it that their bunks need to be neat when they're at war? Like, what's up with that? But what the research suggests, and anyone in the military will tell you, is that if you make your bed every morning, you've accomplished one thing that morning. So you don't need to make your bed. I'm not going to come to your apartment, but you do need to feel like you've accomplished one thing every day. And I think that speaks back to what we were talking about before in terms of how do you structure your time. If you're meeting once a week with your professor and you have 40 or 50 hours of reading to do, that feels hard to manage. How do you break it down? So on Tuesday or Wednesday, I've accomplished something, and that's where the to-do list does come in handy. Being able to cross things out is really important. So you can't get tenure tomorrow, but what can you do today that will help you towards that goal? And track those resolutions. Keep daily goals, whether you've met them, if you've taken a step towards your goal. Again, not in a sort of self-berating kind of way, but in really a way that helps to move things forward. And focus on your range of options. So people do tend to get really stuck in making the right decision. It's very rarely the case in life that you make a right or a wrong decision. You make a choice, and that choice takes you down that path. And that path has positives and that path has negatives. No path is completely positive. So how do you balance that to find balance in your life? I just again, in terms of personal reference, when I was here as an undergraduate at Cornell, and I really knew I did not want to be a researcher. I wanted to be a clinical psychologist. I wanted to sit in an office and talk to people and help them with their problems. That's what I wanted to do. And really every single person that I spoke to here at Cornell, including Professor Gilovich, she's a wonderful person, but did say to me, you have to get a PhD. Like, what society? Nobody's heard of that. Like, you'll never go anywhere with that. So I'm going to say that's not true. The other thing that people told me, I applied to graduate school straight from undergrad and was also told by everyone here at Cornell, it'll never happen. People don't do that. It never works out that way. You shouldn't apply. And I went straight from Cornell to graduate school. So really, I think you need to sort of be on your own path, take advice, listen to it, but you know yourself best. There's no one in this room that knows you. There's no professional that knows you. And I say this to my patients all the time. People come in and they ask me for advice. I'm the psychologist. I'm supposed to know. And my job, the way I really see my job, is helping people along their own paths. I can offer interpretations. I can give insight into certain things. But at the end of the day, you are the person that knows yourself best, even better than I do as a psychologist or as a parent. So I think that part is really important. Be realistic about what your goals are, and you'll be more likely to further yourself along that path. Being realistic doesn't mean not setting high goals for yourself, but be realistic and self-forgiving in terms of setting a path for yourself, and make sure that if there are things that you're worried about, if it's failure, that you really address what those fears are. Here's sort of my final thought about being an adult is the successful transition to adulthood really depends on a person's ability to tolerate uncertainty and persist or be resilient in the face of setbacks. That is really the thing that you need to master most in terms of being a successful adult. And so even grown-ups, I'm old, and people will say, you know, like, I don't feel like an adult. I'm not an adult yet, even though I pay my own cell phone bill, and I have a couch, and I have children, and I have pets, and all of those things. I don't feel like an adult. And some of that is that sense of, I'm not really sure I know how to bounce back. And I think that is the piece that's most helpful. So again, parents can be really helpful with that, and they're going to ease you into, and hopefully you can internalize some of their strength that helps you to recover from your setbacks. But you need to know that they will happen. And part of the issue, and my other area of expertise, which I didn't really talk about, which is what my dissertation is on, is people who are both intellectually gifted and also have a specific learning disability, right? So it sounds like you can't be both, right? Which is sort of what everyone sort of comes at me with. Absolutely, you can be both. The hard part about being smart is that you don't get a lot of practice with failure at a young age, right? Because everything's easy. You learn to read, you're in first grade, you learn to read, it's no problem. You're in advanced math, it's all fine. And so what happens to these young gifted kids is they really don't develop any sense of resiliency because there's no practice. Everything's easy. And for a lot of the students that I work with who are exceptionally bright, they don't really hit a wall until they get to college. And some of them, maybe not until graduate school. So if you are 20-something and the first time you're hitting a problem set you can't do is when you're 25, that's rough, right? So that's really going to shake your confidence and shake your sense of who you are, because you don't know what it looks like. You've never dealt with it before. So part of it is self-acceptance, knowing that if that's not happening, and I can't remember the source of this, but someone once said, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Right? So giving yourself permission to know that being with other people who are academically talented is actually an opportunity. And rather than having it feel like a judgment, it is an opportunity to really explore different parts of yourself. So that's sort of I'm trying to tie this up all on time. I think I'm doing pretty well. I will take a question or two if there are specific things that people are curious about before we end today.
Do you happen to have any comments or thoughts on what changed parents from being kind of lackadaisical and like letting their kids run out, go to whoever's house and sleep over, to becoming helicopter parents and wanting to know where their kids are all the time?
Yeah, so there are two issues to that. One's safety. One's a safety concern, and one is why are parents sort of overly invested in their kids. The answer is there are two prongs to that. The over-involvement in homework, which is a lot of what I work on in my parenting workshops, is sort of the high-stakes college things, right? So college is expensive, and there's more pressure now on value, like what are you getting for a Cornell education? You're paying $70,000 a year, what are you getting for it? It's harder to get in. And so people feel less willing, and I deal with families with this all the time, who say, well, I can't let Johnny just not hand in his homework because his grades matter. If he gets a C, he's not going to get into Cornell. And so there's less willingness to step back and let kids fail and sort of figure things out on their own. So that's part of it. There is a perception with the increase in coverage and media that the world is a more dangerous place. And because you can track your child anywhere, and that's another lecture on whether or not you should track your kids or not. I'm going to say not, and my daughter would agree. Don't track your kids because you have to sort of balance that sense of safety concerns with how that undermines their sense of confidence and independence.
So you were saying that you were in a 5-year program to get your PsyD and that you had to develop short-term goals because those were important. Could you give us an idea of what kind of short-term goals you're talking about or some examples?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So some of it is sort of basic stuff. So like what's due tomorrow? Like what can I make sure that I do tomorrow? But also then what kinds of experiences do I want to make sure I have? So my doctorate's in clinical psychology. I'm also a certified school psychologist. So getting out and doing making sure that I got a school placement where I could work with kids, that was something that was important to me, that I could say, I have a break in the summer for 2 months. What kinds of opportunities are out there for me so I can really shore up my experience with kids in the classroom? And that's something that I can do the first year, because there are plenty of people who would love to have a graduate student warm body in their class, but something that's well away from 5 years from now. What research opportunities are out there for me? Because while I don't want to do my own research, I do like to help other people with their research. Which professors might be good people for me to spend some time with? So that's a short-term goal. And even also, aside from just the academic goals, what are my personal goals, right? Do I want to spend more time in nature? Do I want to make sure I keep in contact? And way back in the day before cell phones, how do I keep in touch with my college roommate? Like how do I make sure that I get a visit? She was in Hoboken. How do I make sure that I get a visit to New York every month? So that there are things that I know that I'm developing, not just in my academic life, but in my whole life. And I do think it's really easy as a graduate student to get really focused on just the work and lose track of sort of the broader picture. You're here to get an education, absolutely, but you're also here to develop yourself as a person. And I think it's important to sort of keep both of those pieces in mind.
So something that the perception of Cornell that I've encountered, especially when I told people I was coming here, was like Cornell being sort of the pressure to look there is really bad for mental health and well-being. I found that there's actually like a ton of programming and stuff to address that here. Obviously, we can still get better. But I guess I'm wondering what we can do institutionally and also as students and young professionals, like in our programs and departments and in our kind of communities that we're all in, make these issues better and
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. Not sure how much institutionally I can really address. I think that starting from the top down, it does need to be a priority here at Cornell, mental health. And I will say it's not just Cornell, but I think mental health gets short shrift across the country at universities where there isn't really good access to mental health support. I'm thrilled to hear that there are workshops here. And I think this is maybe one of them, because I think there really is a need. I think the more collaboration there is, the better the mental health. And I think if there are things within departments that really foster collaboration among colleagues, that can really help to decrease that level of competition and that level of stress. I think that's really important. And the failure piece, and I am hoping to come back in the spring and bring to you something that's called the Failure Project. They have it at other colleges, where it's really people talking about their failures. So you would get to see not just what your professor that you're working under published, but what he wrote that didn't get published. So, not just that he has tenure, but how many times did he apply for tenure and get turned down before he made tenure. So those, I think, are important pieces. Yeah.
I was just wondering, you had talked about that really scary box where you put all the things that you don't like about yourself or the things people have said, and you said that it can get more and more scary, but how do you open that up and not just get deeper and deeper in that?
Yeah, so the short answer, which is not going to be satisfying, is therapy is really helpful for doing that because it can be really scary to take it out all by yourself. Some of it is just looking at it one piece at a time and recognizing it. All of us, people tend to think sort of all or nothing. I'm smart, I'm not. I'm nice, I'm mean. But really most of life is lived in the shades of gray. So it's sort of being able to take things slowly out of the box. And also evaluating where those comments came from. Did they come from sources that really are places that you value? So there's a great song from A Chorus Line. Do people know that show at all? Where she wants to be an actress and she's working under this acting coach who keeps telling her how terrible she is. And at the end of the song, she quits that acting class and finds a different coach. So some of it's really recognizing which teachers and professors are helpful to us in recognizing our talents and which just really beat us down and we need to find a different direction. It's not necessarily us, but we need to be able to sort of differentiate what's ours and what's other people's. It's a longer answer, but that's kind of that. I'm happy to sort of hang around for a little bit, but I know we're at 1:30 and I want to make sure you all get to class. So thank you very much for being here.